Hi, I'm a local author. I live in South Euclid, Ohio, just across town and a few suburbs over from the Lakewood Public Library. And my latest book, A Daily Inside Scoop, takes place in Chagrin Falls, another Cleveland suburb. I write both as Abby L. Vandiver and Abby Collette, and I am a hybrid author. That's one who has published both traditionally and self published. And although I do have a women's fiction book in the works, all my more than 25 novels and short stories are cozy mysteries. I find that when go to speak at libraries, patrons often ask me, what is a cozy mystery? So I figure that's a good place to start to talk about exactly what I write. Cozies are a subgenre of mystery, the number two most popular genre. Romance, in case you didn't know, is the most popular. I don't know that I could write romance. I start blushing even when I just write kissing scenes. But when you think of a cozy, think Agatha Christie or Jessica Fletcher of Murder, She Wrote. Get the picture? Cozies are light, fun reads that are often humorous. No sex, no swearing, no graphic violence, guts, and gore. And the murder always happens off stage. Usually, the only thing the reader gets to see is the body. In them, there's always an amateur sleuth who solves the murder, often to the chagrin of the local law enforcement. And these bakers and bed and breakfast owners or librarians, we always have them having a common or culinary kind of profession. They always think they can outsmart, outmaneuver, and solve the whodunit before the law enforcement can. And they usually do. That is with the help of friends and the gossipers of the small town. Small town. That's another thing about cozy mysteries is the town. The setting is very important in a cozy book. It's always a small town where most people know each other and are of the neighborly sort. A beautiful, idyllic place where anyone would want to live. Well, that is except for the murders that happen every time a new book is published. I'd like to read a little from my book, A Daily Inside Scoop. But first, I'll tell you a little about it. My main character, Bronwyn Cruz, Win for short, just came back from a job in New York City at an ad agency. She has an MBA, but none of that matters because she missed home. So she comes back to Chagrin Falls, and as requested by her father's grandfather, soon after she returns, she takes over the management of the family business. And that business is an ice cream shop owned and operated by her grandparents, and it started way back in 1965. She makes wonderful ice cream, and there are recipes in the back for you to try. Try your hand at making ice cream, and you don't need an ice cream maker for any of them. And so try the recipes in the back of the book, and I'm going to read from chapter 6. Footsteps came crunching in the snow toward me, but in the haze of the night, blurry streetlights and tears threatening to fall, I could only get a glance, and then the figure was out of sight. The same high-pitched voice near the marquee called out again. "She's not coming back," it said. I laughed. That would never have been one of us kids running away after being called. I could just imagine what kind of trouble he'd be in when whoever was calling him caught up with him. My senses no longer dulled. I realized it probably wasn't too smart to sit in the cold any longer. I stood up to go, pain coursing through my nearly frostbitten fingers as I pulled the knapsack up over my shoulders. "I need gloves," I mumbled. I remembered the ones my mother had given me. I reached inside my knapsack to get them, and my nails hit the tin. Grandma K. I pulled it out and sat back down. I hadn't ever taken the time to look through her recipe box. The morning had been so hectic, and the rest of the day so harrowing, I had forgotten all about it. I opened it up and pulled out a card. The emotion that struck me when I saw which one it was almost choked me. The amber light from the lanterns revealed her little scribblings on the card, her side notes, and the date she had written it. The recipe? It was for ice cream made from snow. Snow, the one thing that right now was ruining the business she had started. Still, I had to smile. Snow was also one of the things that my grandma loved. Whenever it would snow, she'd round us kids up. We'd go out, get snow, and she'd make ice cream just for us. My grandmother had never seen snow before leaving the South and was fond of telling us grandkids the story of how her uncle had at one time traveled north. Once arriving back home, she said, he couldn't stop talking about how wonderful everything up here was. People living high, colored folks going wherever they wanted. They even, he had told her, had cotton falling from the sky. For a family of sharecroppers, that was just like equating snow to manna from heaven. And it was what made my grandmother always dream of moving north. There has to be at least a foot of it, she used to say about making snow ice cream, and it has to be fresh fallen snow. Otherwise, it won't taste as sweet. I chuckled. There was nothing sweet about this newly fallen snow. I dug the toe of my Ugg boot into it and gave it a kick. The white particles floated through the air. No, this snow had been a curse. But when I thought how my grandma Kay always made the best out of everything, and she didn't let much stop her, not even the disease that finally took her from us, I decided I wasn't going to let this beat me either. I was going to make the best of it. I was going to make some ice cream from snow. You won't defeat me and you won't stop me, I said with a nod. I'd even taken some to Pop Pop. He could probably It would probably be easier to face him if I came bearing gifts anyway, especially when it was the kind of gift I knew he'd enjoy. I put the recipe box back in my knapsack. I stood up and walked around to the side door, pulled the key to the store out of my pocket, and went back inside. I grabbed the top bowl from a stack of aluminum ones, then put it back. It was too small. I was going to make a big batch. I grabbed the bottom one, a scooper, and the now empty cardboard box the corn had been delivered in that morning. I laid my knapsack on one of the stainless steel prep tables, fished the gloves out, put them on, and headed back out the door. The Chagrin River's two waterfalls bisected our little town. The 20-foot high waterfall that ran just out back of our family business was the larger. It had once powered 9 different mills, and the industrialization of the early 20th century that swept our little neck of the woods could be ascribed to it. On our side of the road, getting up close and personal to the falls wasn't easy. Right next to the shop was a wooden planked overlook that housed a seating area and a plaque with the village's history, which gave way to a series of stairs and a boardwalk. The boardwalk was as close as you got to the falls, but any kid who grew up in Chagrin Falls could tell you that if you wanted to get to the falls, you didn't use the stairs. And from being a kid, I knew that's where you'd find the best unadulterated snow, at the bottom of the falls. I went around to the front of the shop, headed down North Main Street just past the overlook, and turned onto Bell Street. There was a lookout there, just beyond a hill, covered sparsely with trees, the earth beneath uneven due to erosion, all of it now covered with snow. I tore the box I'd brought at one of the seams, tossed it on the ground, and flattened out the top and the bottom of it with my feet. I was going to use it to go to the bottom, my own homemade sled. I could walk back up, but going down was tricky. I sat down on the box, the bowl and scooper in my lap, and gave myself a push. I smiled all the way down. It was just as much fun as when I was 10. Hopping up once I hit the bottom, or close enough to it to make my way down to the water's edge, I took off toward the start of the falls. It hadn't been cold long enough for the water to freeze, but I knew it would be better the closer I got to the origin. I finally found the right spot, and as I bent over to shovel up my first scoopful, I heard a rustling to the side of me. It started off with a thud and lasted a couple seconds longer than I thought it should. "Who's there?" I called out. Not that I was afraid or anything. Nothing happened in Chagrin Falls. Statistically, I'd read, our little village was safer than 82% of all other cities in the U.S. But it would be nice to know who I was sharing the hillside with. "Hello," I called out again. Nothing. I looked down at the scoop in one hand, the bowl in the other, and then at the snow. Even in the dim lighting cast from the street above, the snow glistened, fresh, soft, inviting, more than the depth required by the recipe. It was a perfect spot to do what I'd come down to do. But for some reason, I decided to see who it was who wouldn't answer me instead. I walked down the path that followed the river. It was difficult going, hard to see for want of light, and tough to walk because the snow was deep and the path irregular. A couple minutes in, I was starting to get out of breath and was ready to give up when I heard the noise again. It was higher up the hill than where I stood, so I followed the sound of the footsteps. The person had to hear mine, too. Hey, I said, what are you doing down here? I'm sure they were wondering the same thing about me. Then out of the corner of my eye, I saw something, a multicolored scarf, long, loud, a distinct contrast against the dark silhouette trying to make its way up the hill back to the street, close enough to the light to let me know the intruder had been a child. What were you doing down here? I muttered as I stood and stared at the figure as the figure made its way back to the sidewalk and darted out of view. This wasn't the smartest place to be, especially alone. Ah, had the kid been alone? Us kids used to hang out around the falls in groups. I looked around and listened, but there was nothing other than the sound of the water running over the falls. I shook my head. Here I was worrying about it being unsafe for someone to be down here, and I was out here as well. But I had a good reason. One I was going to get back to right now. I veered off to the right, stepping carefully down the small incline I had taken chasing the noise I'd heard. But before I could get back to the path, my foot bumped into something hard and solid, something that wouldn't budge, and I took a tumble. I nearly did a head flip and must have rolled a couple of times before I came to rest face down in the snow. Ow! I said as I rolled over and sat up. What the heck? I rubbed my head and shook it to make sure I was okay. Nothing appeared loose. Finding that I was still in one piece, I stood up. Brushing the snow off me, I walked back up the few feet I tumbled to see what had made me fall. Oh my God, I said, trying hard to stifle a scream. It was a body lying in the snow. A Daily Inside Scoop is available here at the Lakewood Public Library and at a library near you. And if it isn't, be sure to request it from your librarian. Also look for it at your local independent bookstore, including the Bookshop in Lakewood. The second book in the series, A Game of Cones, will be out in March. Happy reading!